The Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta Falcons face off in a must-win game for both teams in order to climb their way to the top of the NFC South. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, everyone, to another crossover Thursday, where we were previewing the Falcons versus Bucs in Week 14. And today's crossover Thursday episode is, of course, brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast, Aaron Freeman, joined by James Yarcho, one half of the Locked On Bucs dynamic duo. And we are going to, of course, be previewing this Week 14 matchup, talk about some of the key matchups in this game, as well as sort of the path to victory, and maybe give you guys some score predictions at the end of the episode. But of course, like all crossover Thursdays, we have to start things off by talking about the biggest stories of the week. And I'm sure many of you Locked On Falcons and Locked On Bucs listeners who listen each and every day already know some of the things that we're going to talk about because you are everydayers, and we appreciate the everydayers out there that listen each and every day. But if you are listening and you are not yet an everydayer, follow in their footsteps, follow their blueprint by subscribing, following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. But James, it's all about NFC South supremacy. Some teams got to win this division at some point, right? And I guess on Sunday, you know, assuming it doesn't end in a tie, one of these teams will walk away from this game wanting it more than the other one, because they will be the team that wins this game and will be in first place in the NFC South. And you know, that seems like the biggest story for this matchup. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. You know, if the Bucs win this game, then both the Bucs and the Falcons are 6-7, and they are both 3-1 in the division. Both have games remaining against the Panthers and the Saints. The big difference, and that's why this is a must-win game for the Buccaneers with absolutely no exceptions. There are no exceptions here. The Bucs have to win this game if they are going to win the division, is because outside of those Saints and Panthers matchups, the Bucs get the Jaguars and the Packers, while Atlanta gets the Colts and the Bears. So Atlanta has a little bit easier of a remaining 4-game schedule than the Buccaneers do. So if the Bucs lose this one, it's not over, but they need a miracle. They need a ton of help, which means Bucs fans are going to be rooting for the Panthers and the Saints throughout the course of the rest of the season. Plus, they'll have to be Colts and Bears fans as well. They would need a lot of help. So yeah, there's no doubt that this is an absolute must win for the Buccaneers, while it's also kind of a must win for the Falcons, because, you know, you don't want to say that the Bucs would have an easy path if they win this one, but you know, the Falcons want to be able to control their own destiny, right? You win this game and it's going to be probably pretty smooth sailing to the NFC South crown.
Well, there's no such thing as smooth sailing when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons, James, but I get your sentiment when you say that. Yes, it is true. Like, this game is all about controlling your destiny, and the winner of this game has a lot more control over their destiny than the loser of this game. And the loser of this game, you know, I guess you're probably right that the Bucs probably would have a more unfavorable path to sort of climb back out of that hole if they fall into a hole by losing this game than the Falcons would. But it's still nonetheless for both of these teams a potential hole. And, you know, for the Falcons, as you say, you know, maybe it's not as 100% a must-win game, but it's like 98% a must-win game for the Atlanta Falcons, I think, at this point in time. And so can they maintain their supremacy atop the NFC South? And, you know, for both of these teams that are fighting for playoff hopes, like, these are the types of games that you want to see a team that is a quote-unquote legit playoff team, which, you know, legit and playoff team usually don't go in the same sentence as an NFC South winner these last couple of years. But if you want to see that, then you expect this team to take care of business. But I know there's other stories involving the Bucs this week. We'll touch upon that, but I want to touch upon sort of the other underlying story for the Falcons this week is their injuries, right? This is really the first game. The Falcons have had a lot of positive injury luck this year, where they haven't really had any major injuries outside of like Grady Jarrett and a couple of other starters missing a game or two, but nothing major. And this week, the Falcons may be down several starters, right? Based off of the Wednesday initial report. And, Arthur Smith, the Falcons head coach, has indicated that all these guys could potentially play on Sunday, but we're going to be monitoring all these injuries all week long. And that has not been something I've been doing a lot on Locked On Falcons. Like, I'm not doing the Friday show and giving you an update on the injury report because it's really not that impactful, but this week it could be. AJ Terrell is limited with a concussion on Wednesday. Jeff Okudah is limited with a ankle injury. Nate Landman, their starting linebacker, did not practice on Wednesday with a knee injury. Drew Dahlman was out with an ankle. David Onyemata was out with an ankle. Caleb McGarry is potentially out with a knee as well. So, those are 6 potential starters that the Falcons could be down this week. So that could have a significant impact on this matchup. But I know there's other things going on in Tampa with Mike Evans this week as well, right?
Well, yeah, Mike Evans is the feel-good story, of course, for the Buccaneers, being the guy that is now one season away from 1,000 yards of tying the greatest receiver to ever play, Jerry Rice, for the NFL record for consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. And Mike, of course, extending his own NFL record of 1,000-yard seasons to start a career, got his he hit the 1,000-yard mark last week against the Carolina Panthers in a very ugly game. Weather was a big factor in that one. But of course, kind of the other underlying story for the Buccaneers, the other big cause of the ugly game against Carolina is the same as Atlanta's. It's the injuries. Look, Lavonte David and Jamel Dean have both missed the last 2 weeks. SirVocea Dennis, the rookie inside linebacker, he was held out with an illness. Devin White missed the game. He was out with a foot injury. So they had 2 starting inside linebackers for this game. It was KJ Britt and JJ Russell, who was elevated from the practice squad. Then KJ Britt got hurt. So you had Ryan Neal dropping down from safety to play inside linebacker for this game. And the good news for the Bucs is that Lavonte David, Jamel Dean, SirVocea Dennis all returned to practice on Wednesday. So it looks like, I think SirVocea Dennis is pretty much a lock. He'll be able to play now that whatever he was dealing with is over. But now it looks like Lavonte David and Jamel Dean could be on track to play. And even if the Bucs don't have Devin White, who didn't participate in practice on Wednesday, having Lavonte and SirVocea Dennis against a team that put up 156 rushing yards against them, their first matchup, and that was with Bijan only getting 1 carry, it's vital. If they're going to win this game, you have to have Lavonte and SirVocea there in the middle in order to help try to contain a very potent Atlanta rush offense.
Yes, and those injuries will have some impacts on some of the key matchups that we will be discussing as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. So we know that the Falcons and Bucs success depends on having the right team around their quarterback. And while some may question those issues because they just don't have a clear-cut process to find the right team members, but you do with LinkedIn Jobs. Whether you're a small business owner or a hiring manager, you can hire the right people that will allow your team to reach its goals in 2023. And LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. They give you simple tools like screening questions that are going to make it easy for you to focus on the candidates with the right skills and experiences so that you can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and then hire. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So we are continuing Crossover Thursday with myself, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, and James Yarcho of Locked On Bucs. But before we get into some of these key matchups, I got to plug the innovative, the iconic Locked On Podcast Network, who have started the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on Locked On Sports Today. Search Locked On Sports Today. You'll get all the biggest stories across the biggest leagues, national shows, local experts on Locked On Sports Today. Search for it. And of course, if you're a local to the Locked On Falcons, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well. So, James, when we get into some of these key matchups, I know for me, you kind of mentioned it with the Bucs linebacker position. One of those key matches that I'm intrigued to see is Bijan Robinson versus this Bucs defense. We didn't really get to see that outside. I think he played 11 snaps, and most of those he was a decoy and got the ball on one of those plays in that game due to the migraine/headache that he was dealing with at the time that created some controversy among some people speculating on what Bijan was up to on Saturday night before he was not suiting up on Sunday. But we're not going to feed into that controversy and that conspiracy theory. But I do think we saw, as you said, this Falcons team run the ball effectively against this Bucs defense without Bijan Robinson. Can they do it again now that they have Bijan Robinson? Not to mention those Bucs injuries, I think is going to be a critical factor. And I think in this game, Bijan's probably the most important player for the Falcons offense, at least.
Yeah. In Bijan's defense, Tampa's nightlife is a different breed. And if allegedly, if that was true, he's a rookie. It's his first time there. I can't say that I blame him. But no, it's definitely a matchup that I'm keeping an eye on for sure, because Tyler Algier had absolutely no problem running the ball. Desmond Ridder had absolutely no problem running the ball. The Falcons in general, it amazes me that the Bucs gave up 156 rushing yards, but didn't allow a 100-yard rusher. There's only been 2 100-yard rushers against the Buccaneers this year. One was DeAndre Swift with the Philadelphia Eagles. The other was Chuba Hubbard, because that makes sense. The rush defense for the Buccaneers is vital in their ability to get a win. And I am incredibly interested to see how Bijan is utilized, because as your listeners know from our first episode, I was a big Bijan fan coming out of college. I loved watching him play. I hate the fact that I now have to watch him play for the Atlanta Falcons, but it doesn't mean that I enjoy him as a player any less. So I'll be interested to see how Arthur Smith utilizes him, how the Buccaneers react to him, and how they're able to defend him, especially still dealing with some of the injuries that they have on the defensive side of the ball. And to flip it from the Atlanta offense to the Buccaneers offense, the key matchup that I'm looking for is Baker Mayfield against Atlanta's secondary. In the first game, Baker had 275 passing yards with a touchdown, did have the interception, but Atlanta has the 11th best pass defense with 208.1 yards allowed per game. And they have the 7th best scoring defense with 20 points per game allowed. So the Buccaneers have to find a way to do what they didn't do the first time around, and that is capitalize in the red zone. And that wasn't just a problem against the Falcons. It's been an ongoing issue all year long. And since their last matchup, Cade Otton and Rachaad White have been much more involved in the passing game, which adds a little bit new of an element and a new wrinkle compared to what the Falcons saw the first time around. But the Buccaneers, to win this game, have to convert on those red zone opportunities and those explosive opportunities down the field to Mike Evans. Baker can't be throwing the ball to Devin Tompkins at the goal line in double coverage again. Can't have it, can't do it. Devin Tompkins, all due respect, is like 5'1", being double covered by the Falcons secondary. It wasn't going to work. It didn't work, and it was awful. And then, of course, the Bucs have to find a way to get Chris Godwin involved. I don't know what it's going to take to get Dave Canales and Baker to start utilizing him more, but they have to use every weapon in their arsenal. And that means they have to hyper target Chris Godwin. And I don't know, maybe now that I'm eliminated from my fantasy playoffs and I had Godwin on my roster and now my matchups don't matter, he'll end up having a 150-yard and 2 touchdown game, because that would happen to me.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's far-fetched, because again, going back to what we discussed earlier, the Falcons' 2 starting cornerbacks could be out of the lineup this game. That we, obviously at least one half of the people listening to this episode don't hope for that. The other half certainly are hoping for that. But yeah, that to me for the Falcons defense is going to be the big matchup. If AJ Terrell and Jeff Okudah are healthy, that gives me hope that the Falcons can keep a lid on this Bucs defense, or I'm sorry, this Bucs offense, but we saw those guys struggle to keep a lid on Mike Evans. Is one of the reasons why he had another 1,000-yard season. Chris Godwin was not particularly impactful in that game. I think a lot of that is owed to Jeff Okudah's ability to blanket him, while Mike Evans was kind of feasting on AJ Terrell on one side. Chris Godwin was pretty quiet in this game. But if those guys do their thing, and as you mentioned, with Rachaad White and Cade Otton being a bigger part of the offense than they were earlier this season, that also impacts, where the Falcons linebacker issue is with Nate Landman being down. And right now, if he's out of this game, their replacement is Andre Smith. And Andre Smith is, I hate to say it, one of the worst coverage linebackers I've seen in recent memory. And now, and so that is something that I think the Bucs could really exploit. Especially. So it is potentially favorable matchups across the board for the Bucs weapons, depending on the health of the Falcons defense going into this Sunday. And so, as you say, Baker Mayfield is going to be critical with his decision making and hitting those receivers. And I appreciate Baker Mayfield because he always puts the ball in harm's way a couple of times every single week, very similar to Desmond Ridder. So it feels like the Falcons will have some opportunities to make some plays, especially with Jesse Bates playing as well as he has the last few weeks, or really all season long, on his potential way to a Pro Bowl type of year. Sorry to Antoine Winfield if he isn't getting quite the love, but I'll give you a second to rant about that, James.
How is it that Antoine Winfield Jr. isn't even in the top 10 of Pro Bowl voting for safeties among fans? How does that make any sense at all? Dude just won Defensive Player of the Week. He has been playing at an all-pro caliber level, single-handedly tried to beat the Falcons the last time. Did it literally by himself. And still just no love, no attention. I will die on the hill that Antoine Winfield Jr. is the best safety in the NFL, and apparently nobody knows it. Unreal.
Well, he's about to get the Lavonte David treatment, because Lavonte David was quietly second best linebacker in the NFL for like a decade or something like that. Maybe behind Luke Kuechly is probably the only, or Urlacher. I don't know if their careers overlap, but like,
that's the thing, is Lavonte put up better numbers than Kuechly did, and Kuechly got all the attention and all the love because the Panthers were good and the Bucs sucked, and that's what it boiled down to. Awful. Now I'm upset. See what you've done, Aaron.
Well, maybe you'll feel a little bit better as we wrap up today's episode, talking a little bit more about the Pats, the victory, and maybe give you guys some score predictions, and we'll get into that, guys, as we wrap up today's Crossover Thursday. Now, it's that time of year where, if you're like me, you struggle to find the right gifts. I was just telling James before we recorded that I haven't really started my Christmas shopping, but I know one gift that I am certainly intrigued by is the skylight frame, because it's the perfect gift for everyone on my wish list, whether it's grandparents, new parents, family, friends. It's a touchscreen photo frame that you can send photos to straight from your phone, and they appear in seconds. You can even preload photos before the box is opened. It's a great group gift, since you can invite multiple friends and family members to share photos on the same frame. It's effortless thanks to the free and easy to use Skylight app. Its setup takes less than a minute, and it's going to look beautiful in your home due to that crisp HD resolution that looks like a real modern photo frame. As a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $15 off your purchase at Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/lockedon. Get $15 off your purchase at skylightframe.com/lockedon. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/lockedon. So we are wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, Locked On Bucs Crossover Thursday. Of course, we'll have more coverage all week long on this upcoming matchup with days to come. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, here on Locked On Falcons, we'll give you some updates on those injury, and I'm sure Jays will have excellent coverage of the Bucs for the rest of the week. But today we're wrapping up talking about paths to victory, final thoughts, score predictions. And for me, James, I talked about this earlier this week on Locked On Falcons, given some of the injuries with Caleb McGarry being down at right tackle, I'm not as confident that the Falcons are going to be able to run the ball as effectively as they want to, as they did last time. And so I think more of this game is going to lean on the quarterback than before it did in that previous matchup. And so I think they need to see Desmond Ridder play well. And he played one of his better games against the Bucs on the road. And saying Desmond Ridder played well on the road this year has been a rare sentence that I have uttered. But obviously, you know, the story of that game was the 3 turnovers that he had, the 3 fumbles that he had in the red zone that took points off the board for the Falcons. And those 3 mistakes that he made in that game, and he also missed a throw to Drake London when Antoine Winfield broke up in the end zone that could have been a touchdown, and the Falcons wound up settling for a field goal. But, you know, that adds up potentially to 25 points, you know, that the Falcons left on the field on that Sunday in Tampa. And those points and those plays that he did not make, I think went a long way to lead to his benching, you know, a week later against the against the Tennessee Titans. And then, you know, that 2-week stint on the bench, the 2 weeks after that. And so I think this game really is instrumental for Desmond Ridder to basically show, hey, yeah, I didn't necessarily play a perfect game that last time, but, you know, the 90% of that game that I played well, I can raise that number to 100%, and you'll see me play a clean game and also do a lot of the things with his legs, with his arms that he did in that first game. And you could get that, you know, potential 30 burger or 40 burger type of game in this matchup. And so I think Desmond Ridder sort of taking ownership and being kind of the driving engine of this offense this week is going to be the Falcons' path to victory, and finding ways to get the ball into Bijan Robinson's hand, not only as a runner and a receiver, I think is going to be a key part. But for me, I'll sort of pass it to you, James, in a second with my score prediction, but I feel like this is going to be more of a shootout because of some of the concerns I have with the Bucs or at the Falcons on defense with the injuries. And I think the Bucs will be able to move the ball against them and potentially put points on the board. So I'm going with a shootout. I got the Falcons winning at home. It'll be a close ball game going into the final minute. And I feel a little bit better about Desmond Ridder than I do Baker Mayfield. Call me biased in those closing minutes. So I got the Falcons winning this one like 31-28.
Okay. All right. Well, and it's funny you bring up that you don't feel that they're going to run quite as well as they did the first time around, because my key to victory is to force Desmond Ridder to beat you. You can't allow those 150 plus rushing yards and for Atlanta to dictate the game and have these long sustained drives, whether they end in points or not, like they did the first time. This Bucs defense is so beaten and battered and bruised that they have to be able to capitalize on what opportunities they get to get off the field. You can't allow, you know, the Falcons to go 9 of 13 on third downs. You can't allow 10, 12, 13 play drives. And really the key to that to me is going to be Vita Vea, who I think out of anybody in the trenches, he is probably the most likely to take over a game on either side of this field for either one of these teams. And even though he didn't participate in practice on Wednesday, I fully expect him to play. There have been plenty of Wednesdays that he's missed and he's battled through dealing with a toe injury, but he has to set the tone up front against that dangerous rushing offense. And then if you have Lavonte, if you have SirVocea Dennis lined up behind him, that's great. If not, he has to be the guy that blows up the running lanes and slow down the ball carrier. Even if he doesn't make the tackle, he has to do enough. The reinforcements come in and they're able to take down Bijan or take down Tyler Algier. And in the passing game, of course, it's Vita Vea that's going to be the guy that's going to blow up blocks, create lanes and opportunities for guys like Kalijah Kancey, who I know you're a big fan of, for SirVocea Dennis, for Yaya Diaby, for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who even got a couple of pressures as an inside linebacker on a couple of plays last week. So to me, this is going to be an old-fashioned, ugly, grinded out, gross football game that's going to be won by the big guys in the trenches. And like I said, I think Via's probably the one guy for either team on either side of the ball that can really take over a game. And I go back to the first matchup, and it was an ugly, grinded out, turnover filled football game that came down to the leg of Younghoe Koo because of the Bucs inability to get off the field after they had tied it up. And I think this one's going to be the exact same way. It's going to come down to the leg of Chase McLaughlin, who is going to do to the Falcons what the Falcons did to the Bucs. And I'm going to take the Bucs 23-21 on a last second field goal by McLaughlin.
That is certainly a possibility. I understand why you expect that, because I think most weeks that's the type of games that the Falcons play in. I don't know if they're suited to win that type of grinded out game for the same reasons that you basically broke down. I just don't know if this is the week that they can sort of just out physical this Bucs team. So I think they'll have to out finesse them. So I guess we'll see what happens. But James, any sort of parting shots for the listeners before we duck out of here on Crossover Thursday?
Not really. The only parting thought that I have is that I'm probably with most of your Georgia Bulldog fan listeners that Alabama has no place being in the college football playoff. And as much as I can't stand Florida State, they absolutely got hosed. So I'm sympathizing with all of you Bulldog fans from afar that can we just not with Alabama, please? For once.
I understand. Well, you extended that olive branch to my listeners. I will extend one, not necessarily to your listeners, but I'm sure your listeners will agree with this. I want to send my condolences to the Carolina Panthers organization for how dysfunctional and disastrous they are. It's so sad that this happened to such a, stalwart landmark organization like the Carolina Panthers. And I just hate to see all their dreams just sort of kind of turn to ash in their mouth. And it's just, I could not wish that upon any fan base anywhere out there in the world. So sorry.
No. Yeah, it really is a shame. We're both rooting for the opportunity to play against Jameis Winston, right? Like that's, Derek Carr goes down and we're all like, ooh, we might get a Jameis game. We're all rooting for that, right? If there's one thing that our collective listeners can really bond over, it is our hatred of the Saints and the Panthers. I think between the Bucs and the Falcons, most fans are just like, yeah, it's a divisional game, but it's kind of whatever. It was super exciting when it was like Michael Vick versus Derek Brooks and like those matchups. And now it's just like, yeah, we got to play twice, but mostly let's just hate the Saints and Panthers.
Absolutely. Like, look, we hated Tom Brady, but we hated Tom Brady. It wasn't personal with the Bucs, So that's a whole separate. We'll leave that aside. Anyway, guys, we really appreciate you tuning in for another Crossover Thursday. Of course, we'll have you covered all week long for this upcoming Week 14 matchup between the Falcons and Bucs. Of course, check out Locked On Sports Today, their 24/7 streaming channel to get the insight on all the sports, all the leagues. Of course, on YouTube. And of course, continue to make us your first listens all week long. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.